Chairman, Vice Chairman Hamilton, and members of the Commission. I'm very pleased to be here. As you've just mentioned, Tom Pickering, the former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs and one of our most experienced and respected Foreign Service officers in U.S. history, is here with me. During my years as Secretary of State, if I were traveling or otherwise occupied, Ambassador Pickering was the department's representative at White House meetings related to terrorism. We thought it would help in providing the most complete answers if Ambassador Pickering were available as appropriate to add his recollections to mine. I would also like to emphasize at the outset my desire to be of as much help as possible to the Commission. We can't turn back the clock to before September 11th, but we must do everything we can to prevent similar tragedies, and we owe it to the families of the victims of 9/11 and to us all. Mr. Chairman, we all know that history is lived forward and written backward. Much seems obvious now that was less clear prior to September 11th, but I can say with confidence that President Clinton and his team did everything we could think of, based on the knowledge we had to protect our people and disrupt and defeat al-Qaeda. We certainly recognized the threat posed by the terrorist groups. Although terror was not new, we realized we faced a novel variation. Instead of being directed by a hostile country, the new breed of terrorist was independent, multinational, and well-versed in modern information technology. During our time in office, the transnational threat was a dominant theme in public statements, private deliberations, and foreign relations. This was reflected in the administration's decision to expand the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, intensify security cooperation with other countries, enlarge counterterrorism training assistance, double overall counterterrorism expenditures, increase anti-terrorist rewards, freeze terrorist assets, train first responders here at home, plan for the protection of infrastructure against cyber attacks, and reorganize the National Security Council with a mandate to prepare the government to shield our people from unconventional dangers. As early as 1995, President Clinton said that, and I quote, "Our generation's enemies are the terrorists who kill children or turn them into orphans," unquote. The President repeatedly told the United Nations that combating terrorism topped America's agenda and should top theirs. He urged every nation to deny sanctuary to terrorists and to cooperate in bringing them to justice. Before Y2K, we undertook the largest counterterrorism operation in U.S. history to that time. Cabinet members or their representatives met virtually every day for the sole purpose of detecting and preventing terrorist attacks. I fully embraced an aggressive policy before and especially after August 7, 1998, when terrorist explosions struck our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. This was my worst day as Secretary of State. Within a week, we had clear evidence that Osama bin Laden was responsible. The question for us was whether to rely on law enforcement or take military action. We decided to do both. We prosecuted the conspirators we had captured, but we also launched cruise missiles at al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan. The timing of the strikes was prompted by credible, predictive intelligence that terrorist leaders, possibly including bin Laden, would be gathering at one of the camps. The day after the strikes, the White House convened a meeting to study further military option. Our primary target, bin Laden, had not been hit, so we were determined to try again. In subsequent weeks, the President specifically authorized the use of force, and there should have been no confusion that our personnel were authorized to kill bin Laden. We did not, after all, launch cruise missiles for the purpose of serving legal papers. To use force effectively, we placed warships equipped with cruise missiles on call in the Arabian Sea. We also studied the possibility of sending a U.S. Special Forces team into Afghanistan to try and snatch bin Laden. But success in either case depended on whether we knew where bin Laden would be at a particular time. Although we consumed all the intelligence we had, we did not get this information, and instead we occasionally learned where bin Laden had been, or where he might be going, or where someone who appeared to resemble him might be. It was truly maddening. I compared it to one of those arcade games where you manipulate a lever hooked to a claw-like hand that you think, once you put your quarter in, will actually scoop up a prize. But every time you try to pull the basket out, the prize falls away. The Africa Embassy bombings intensified our efforts to neutralize bin Laden and also to protect our own people. Every morning that I was in Washington, I personally reviewed the latest information about threats to our diplomatic posts. I was struck by the number of danger signals we received and also by the difficulty of making a clear judgment about whether a threat was credible enough to warrant closing an embassy. Even as we took protective measures and looked for ways to use force effectively, we pressed ahead diplomatically. Shortly after our cruise missile strikes, the Taliban called the State Department to complain. This led to a prolonged dialogue during which we repeatedly pushed for custody of bin Laden. The Taliban replied by offering a menu of excuses. They said that surrendering bin Laden would violate their cultural tradition of hospitality and that they would be overthrown by their own people if they yielded bin Laden in response to U.S. pressure. Perhaps, they said, bin Laden will leave voluntarily. At one point, they told us he had already gone. In any case, we were assured that bin Laden was under house arrest. That was a lie, since he continued to show up in the media threatening Americans. In 1999, we developed a new strategy aimed at pulling all the diplomatic levers we had simultaneously. We went to each of the countries we thought had influence with the Taliban and asked them to use that influence to help us get bin Laden. One such country was Pakistan, whose leaders were reluctant to apply real pressure to the Taliban because it would alienate radicals within their own borders. There was a limit to the incentives we could offer to overcome this reluctance. Pakistan's nuclear tests in 1998 had triggered one set of sanctions. A military coup in 1999 triggered more. Nevertheless, in our discussions with Pakistani leaders, we were blunt. We told them that bin Laden is a murderer who plans to kill again. We need your help in bringing him to justice. Our ambassador delivered this message, so did Tom Pickering, so did I, so did the President of the United States. In return, we received promises but no decisive action. We couldn't offer enough to persuade Pakistani leaders, such as General Musharraf, to run the risks that would have been necessary. It was not until September 11th that Musharraf had the motivation in his own mind to provide real cooperation. And even that has not yet resulted in bin Laden's capture, though it apparently has led to several attempts on Musharraf's life. The other two countries we went to were Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and both agreed to deliver the right message. The Saudis sent one of their princes to confront the Taliban directly, and he came back and told us the Taliban were idiots and liars. The Saudis then downgraded diplomatic ties with the Taliban, cut off official assistance, and denied visas to Afghans traveling for non-religious reasons, and the UAE did the same. Our diplomats, including Ambassador Pickering, also met directly with Taliban leaders. We told them that if we did not get bin Laden, we would impose sanctions both bilaterally and through the UN, which we did. We also warned them clearly and repeatedly that they would be held accountable for any future attacks traceable to al-Qaeda. In retrospect, we know that the Taliban and bin Laden had a symbiotic relationship. The Taliban needed the money and muscle al-Qaeda provided. Bin Laden needed space for his operatives to live and train. And there was never a real chance the Taliban would turn bin Laden over to us or to anybody else. Mr. Chairman, I would like now to offer briefly some of the recommendations for the future. We must begin by thinking clearly about what it is we need to do. We were not attacked on September 11th by a noun, terrorism. We were attacked by individuals affiliated with al-Qaeda. They are the enemies who killed our fellow citizens and foreigners, and defeating them should be the focus of our policy. If we pursue goals that are unnecessarily broad, such as the elimination not only of threats but also of potential threats, we will stretch ourselves to the breaking point and become more vulnerable, not less, to those truly in a position to harm us. We also need to remember that al-Qaeda is not a criminal gang that can simply be rounded up and put behind bars. It is the center of an ideological virus that has wholly perverted the minds of thousands and distorted the thinking of millions more. Until the right medicine is found, the virus will continue to spread. And that remedy begins with confidence. Bin Laden and his cohorts have absolutely nothing to offer their followers except destruction, death, and the illusion of glory. Puncturing this illusion is the key to winning the battle of ideas. The problem is not combating al-Qaeda's inherent appeal, for it has none. The problem is changing the fact that major components of American foreign policy are either opposed or misunderstood by much of the world. According to the State Department's Advisory Group on Public Diplomacy, published recently, the bottom has indeed fallen out of support for the United States. This unpopularity has handed bin Laden a gift that he has eagerly exploited. He is viewed by many as a leader of all those who harbor anti-American sentiments, and this has given him a following that is wholly undeserved. If we are to succeed, we must be sure that bin Laden goes down in history not as a defender of the faith or champion of the dispossessed, but rather as what he is, a murderer, a traitor to Islam, and a loser. The tarnishing of America's global prestige will require considerable time and effort to undo. And that's why we need long-range counterterrorism plans that take advantage of the full array of our national security tools. This plan must include the comprehensive reform of our intelligence structures, a vastly expanded commitment to public diplomacy and outreach, especially within the Arab and Muslim worlds, a far bolder strategy for stabilizing Afghanistan, revised policies towards the key countries of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, expansion of the Nunn-Lugar program to secure weapons of mass destruction materials on a global basis, a new approach to handling and sharing of information concerning terrorist suspects, and a change in the tone of American national security policy to emphasize the value of diplomatic cooperation. And Secretary of State Powell has made a concerted effort to begin this. Let me close by saying that I sympathize greatly with the President and others in positions of responsibility at this time. Each day brings with it the possibility of a new terrorist strike. The March 11 train bombings in Madrid remind us that despite all that is being done, our enemies have a broad range of targets. We should all expect and prepare ourselves for the likelihood that further strikes will take place on our own soil, and we must be united in making sure that if and when that happens, it will do absolutely nothing to advance the terrorist goals. It will not cause divisions within and among the American people. On the contrary, it must bring us closer together and make us even more determined to fulfill our responsibilities. For more than 2 centuries, our countrymen have fought and died so that liberty might live, and since September 11th, we have been summoned, each in our own way, to a new round in that struggle. We cannot underestimate the risks or anticipate the final victories will come easily or soon, but we can draw strength from the knowledge of what terror can and cannot do. Terror can turn life to death and laughter to tears and shared hopes to sorrowful memories. It can crash a plane and bring down towers that scrape the sky, but it cannot alter the essential goodness of the American people or diminish our loyalty to one another or cause our nation to turn its back on the world. Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you this morning, and I'd be very pleased now to answer your questions.
Thank you very much.